this is the first 2025 Curtin Institute for Energy Transition webinar, and I'm very pleased to have Professor Toshi Arimura-san join us. I think we're very privileged to have such a world-leading expert, and it's fantastic to have everyone back. So very excited for kicking off this series. As we do, I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land of which Curtin Bentley campus is, which is the Whadjuk Noongar people, and pay our respects to elders past and present. And I think also as a learning institution, we recognise the cultural and knowledge contribution they give to us and the privilege that we are to be here. And I always say this, the opportunity the energy transition presents for our First Nations people moving forward. So today, as I said, we're very fortunate to have such a world-leading energy economist, Mr. Toshi-san. So Toshi's going to talk about Japan's path towards carbon neutrality and carbon pricing. You would have read, but he's a professor in environmental economics and a director of the Research Institute for Environmental Economics and Management at Waseda University. He's been a visiting scholar to Paris School of Economics and Sciences, Po. He was a professor at Sophia University and was a visiting scholar with George Mason University Resources for the Future as a recipient of the Abe Fellowship. His major research area is climate change, and he's a co-editor of Carbon Pricing in Japan, which received the Commentary Award Society for Environmental Economics and Policy Studies. And his Ph.D, he is in economics from the University of Minnesota, and he does serve on many Japanese government committees on environmental issues and has been advising a lot on this topic at the highest levels. And also is a recipient of Outstanding Publication Award from SEEPS and president of SEEPS. So we really are an esteemed professor. He's here on a Sumitomo Fellowship, and we're really thrilled to be able to host Toshi-san while he's here. He's going to talk for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have some Q&A through the chat function that we're happy. I'll moderate those. So thanks, Toshi. Over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for the great introduction, and thank you for having me here at the Institute for Energy Transition in 2 weeks. I'm really enjoying meeting people at Curtin University and the other stakeholders in Western Australia. And so I would like to say, and it's my honor to present my research and some of the policy developments in Japan in this energy transition webinar. So I want to start my presentation. Okay, let's see.
I'll just jump into, if people have questions, please use the Q&A function, and we'll follow. I'll moderate any questions once Toshi's finished.
Okay, then let me start my presentation. So the title is the Japanese Carbon Neutral Strategies, a Green Transformation and Carbon Pricing Update. And for your information, in Japan, the Japanese government is trying to use the word GX to stand for the green transformations. So I will use the word GX many times in my presentation, but that stands for the green transformation that the Japanese government is trying to achieve. And here is the content of my presentation. So I want to share with you the energy planning by the Japanese government, and then I will talk about Japanese carbon pricing before the announcement of carbon neutrality. So Japanese government was not supporting carbon pricing for many years. So I want to share with the development during that period. Then I will move to the Japanese carbon pricing after the announcement of carbon neutrality, so this is like a 5 years development. And I'll touch upon the pathway to this carbon neutrality, the industrial move by under the GX, and I will conclude my presentation. So let me start from the carbon neutral policy and energy planning. So this is kind of the picture, the drawing, the graph that the Japanese government started to show after they announced the carbon neutrality target by 2050. So the government basically said, we will achieve carbon neutrality, we will reduce our emissions, which was 1.2921 billion tons in 2019, but even if we make all the efforts, we cannot make the emission to the zero. So we need activities that promote carbon sink or carbon renewable. Then there'll be tradings between those who does carbon sink and removal and those who are still emitting. So I think the first time the Japanese government admitted the necessity of the emission trading for the Japan to achieve carbon neutrality or for Japanese climate policies. And this figure shows how the Japanese power generations were in 2019 and how our planning has shifted after the announcement. So in 2019, 18% of our electricity was generated from renewable and 6% from nuclear and 37% from LNG and 32% from coal. And before the announcement of the carbon neutrality, our 2030 target was 23% of renewables and 21% from nuclear. The rest are from coal and natural gas. However, after making the announcement of the carbon neutrality, they expanded the target to the 37% for the renewable energies. And in addition, government put hydrogen and ammonia as a source of electricity generation, and the government wants to have at least 1% of generation coming from hydrogen or ammonia. And I think this is a very unique energy planning that government is trying to use ammonia to reduce carbon emissions. Among the renewables, solar 14 to 16%, wind 5%, and geothermal 1%, and so forth. So solar and wind are the major source of renewable. And last month, the government updated their energy basic plan. So this plan of fiscal year of 2023 shows the composite of electricity generations. So actually, in 2023, 22.9% of electricity was generated from renewables. Actually, this is all the, so we have already achieved our old 2030 target before the government made carbon neutrality announcement. So that we are making some progress. And if you look at the our target for the 2040, we are aiming that to achieve 40 to 50% of generation coming from renewable energies. In the nuclear 20% and fossil fuel. We're trying to make a change from 68.6% to 30 to 40%. However, as you can imagine, that to reduce carbon emission, we have to have CCS. Well, we have to expand the share of hydrogen and ammonia generation by 2040. So that's the planning of the Japanese energy. Now, let me turn into the Japanese carbon pricing before the announcement of carbon neutrality. This table, this slide review what are the carbon pricing. You're basically putting a price on the carbon emissions, and that way it will give an incentive for consumers or producers to reduce carbon emissions. And how can we do that? Well, you can do it with putting a carbon tax, or we can do it in emission trading schemes. And I think Australia has a safeguard system, which is kind of ETS. And we also have, you can also use the carbon credit market, which is not mandatory, but on a voluntary basis, we can use incentive for consumers or producers to reduce carbon emissions, and we acknowledge their contribution to the emission reductions. And carbon pricing has never been popular until announcement of carbon neutrality in Japan, but especially at the national level. But the local governments worked hard to introduce these systems. For example, in Tokyo, the capital of Japan, has been leading this policy, and they started ETS in 2010. And our neighbor Saitama also started ETS in 2011. And I have published a book on carbon pricing in Japan with Professor Matsumoto at Aima Gakuin. And you can actually download it. And this is free. This is the open access book from Springer. And this table summarizes the carbon, these two regional ETS in Japan. Tokyo ETS basically targets 1,300 facilities. But the uniqueness of Tokyo ETS is that it targets commercial sector as well. I believe that many of Australians have visited Japan, and you know that Tokyo, we have lots of buildings, but we don't have a big power plant, or we don't have a big manufacturing facilities. So government decided to target the commercial sector as well as manufacturing sectors. In Saitama, they have lots of manufacturing facilities, and 600 facilities are regulated under this Saitama ETS. And both systems has been successfully reducing emissions. For the Tokyo, the first target was in phase 1 from 2001 to 2014, emission reduction was 8% or 6%. But they have already achieved more than 20% of the emission reductions. And by the third period, when the target of commercial building was a 27% reduction, they have already achieved more than enough. So far, they have been doing a pretty good job in reducing emissions. But at the national level, we do have carbon tax. Actually, during the 2010, when Democratic Party of Japan was in power, they were trying to introduce nationwide emission trading schemes, but they failed to introduce it. But at the same time, they decided to introduce carbon tax. So in that, I mean, we have had a petroleum and coal tax after the oil crisis in late 70s. But on top of that, they added carbon tax called tax for climate change mitigations, which is 289 yen. So less than 3 Australian dollars. So the price effect is not much. However, the idea is that they will get a tax revenue, and they will use this tax revenue to promote renewable energy and energy efficiency or innovation of new energies. And we have had this much of tax revenue, but it peaked in the 2018. That the peak revenue was 255 billion yen. And if you divide this by 100, so it's basically $2.5 billion. And now we want to achieve we need more policy. The government wants to have more revenue. So that's the current situation. And this situation have changes after the government made a carbon neutral announcement. So Prime Minister Suga and Kishida made a big changes. So first, they changed the concept of carbon pricing. Well, I mean, government now look at the carbon pricing from a new perceptions. And they said that carbon pricing, if we can design well, it may contribute to economic growth through innovations. And so rather than looking at carbon pricing as just a cost, they are looking at this is an opportunity for innovations. And they formed what they call Green Transformation League, GX League, which was announced in 2021. And they invited private companies to join this league and pledge their emission reduction target. And to help this government move, they started to promote a voluntary carbon market. And they published a carbon market report. I was the chair of this carbon market report committee. And they helped the Tokyo Stock Exchange to start a trial market of carbon credit. And interestingly, Japanese Business Federation, who was opposing to the carbon pricing, now look at carbon pricing as an important element for green transformation. And they support emission trading schemes, not carbon tax. So that's the Japanese business situations now. So this is how GX League works. So companies who are part of this GX League, they have to pledge their ambitious greenhouse gas emission target. And then they have to deliver emission reduction. And if they cannot, they are supposed to get carbon credits to fulfill their emission reduction target. And the government is trying to help the Tokyo Stock Exchange to have this carbon credit market. And in that market, now they are trading J credits. The J credit is a voluntary scheme that I will explain later. And Tokyo Stock Exchange started this market from 2023. But this is all a voluntary scheme, so there is no penalty for companies not achieving the emission reduction target. So that's a big point. And 2023 May, the Parliament passed the Green Transformation Act, and which has at least two important components. First, the government are now committed to issue the Japan Climate Transition Bond. And with issuing this bond, Japanese government gets a funding for the R&D, and they will distribute to the private sectors. And they are aiming 20 trillion yen in 10 years. In addition, so they are introducing carbon pricing. So the idea is that companies, private firms do innovation first using the assistance from this transition bond. And once the technologies are in place, the carbon pricing help to the penetration of these new technology or new energy in the Japanese economy. So the carbon pricing, they have two components. One is an emission trading schemes, what they call GX ETS. And as I explained, GX ETS phase 1 started in 2023 on a voluntary basis. And phase 2, 26, they will become mandatory. And we will have an auction of the permits, allowances for the power sector in 2033. And in addition, they will have a carbon tax, but they don't call it tax because the Prime Minister didn't like to call it tax. So they call it carbon surcharge or GX surcharge. But this is a charges on the imported fossil fuel. And as you know that the Japanese economy have been relying on the imported fossil fuel almost 100%. And we will have a surcharge after 2028. And I explained a little bit the details of this in my another book, Introduction to Environmental Economics and Policy in Japan. This is also an open access, so you can download some chapter explaining this GX. And this GX League and GX ETS has been successful in inviting many participation of private corporations. 568 companies participated, which covers more than 50% of Japanese CO2 emissions. And you can look at the name of the big companies like Toyota or Nissan Honda or Nippon Steel and ENEOS, or you can find Impex, which I found the name in the city of the Perth. So on big energy companies, on IHI and Mitsubishi Corporation, they are all a part of this, and Tokyo Gas and JERA as well. And so the reason why part of the reason they participated in this league is that to have access from the financial assistance from the GX bond, they must be part of this GX league. So that's, I think, that's the big reason for companies participating in GX ETS, even though it's voluntary. So government will issue the 20 trillion yen of the bond, and 6 to 8 trillion yen will be used for expansion of non-fossil fuel energies. So it's including the support for hydrogen and ammonia. And 90 to 12 trillion yen will be used for the energy conservation or drastic energy savings or nationwide domestic demand measures. And 2 to 4 trillion yen will be used for CCS or carbon recycling or CCUS. Yeah. And this is funding from the government. And the government is hoping that private investment follow, and which will sum up to the 150 trillion yen, which is needed for the Japanese government economy to achieve carbon neutrality. And this picture shows how the Japanese GX ETS will develop. So currently we are in the phase 1, which is in the voluntary basis, but the mandatory scheme will start in April 26. And we actually have discussed the design of a mandatory ETS in the later part of the last year. So we had committees from September to December. And the proposal was approved by the cabinet in the last month. So now the government is trying to revise the GX law so that ETS will become mandatory in 26, and they are discussing right now in the parliament. And the 2033, there'll be an auction of permits. And this slide explains about the Japanese domestic credit scheme called J-Credit. And J-Credit is a voluntary credit. So they can create this credit by investing in energy efficiency or renewable energy or forest conservation. And companies can use for this CDP survey or their own carbon offset or for other purposes. So they have been doing this for more than 15 years. Sorry. And they, as I explained, the Tokyo Stock Exchange started the market of this J-Credit since 2023. And the price for credits for the energy saving is 1,680 yen. So if you divide this by 100, it will give you the Australian dollar. So it's $16. For the renewable energy, the price is $30. The forestry is $80. So corporations like to actually prefer credit from forestry or renewable energy to energy saving credits. So that's an interesting situation. And currently, we are observing that these prices are gradually increasing in facing the mandatory scheme. So there seems to be a demand that is increasing for these credits. And so this slide summarizes the basic design for phase 2, the mandatory schemes. So we will aim to regulate farms with 100,000 ton emissions or more. So it's different from Tokyo system, which regulates the emitters at facility level, and which includes power sectors, steel sectors, chemical sectors, automobile, and domestic airline industry, etc. And the government is expecting 300 to 400 farms under this ETS. And we will start from free allowances, and we will introduce benchmark for the energy intensive sectors. I think this is similar to the Australian safeguard. But for the other sectors, we will use grandfathering based on historical emissions. And government is going to introduce price floor, lower limit, and also the upper limit. And we will have a allowance system. So this is different from the emission reduction credit scheme, which has been used by Tokyo Saitama system. So with that, companies can trade their allowances once they receive it before they reduce emissions. So we expect more liquidity in the carbon markets. And offsets, for now, Japanese government only allows J credits that I explained and joint crediting mechanism. This is a bilateral international credit scheme that the Japanese government has promoting with developing countries. So this is summarized what I have explained. So basically, we will start from the bond to promote GX, green transformation, and help the investment from the private sectors. And we started the GX ETS on a voluntary basis, and becoming mandatory in 26. And this carbon surcharge will be introduced 28, and ETS auction will start in 33. And using the revenue from auction and carbon surcharge, the government will pay back the 2050. So it's a long-term commitment, very, very long-term. And pathway to carbon neutrality. So how we were going to achieve the carbon neutrality by 2050? So this is a figure that was presented by the government in 21 after the announcement for carbon neutrality. And if you look at the electricities, we expect the renewables cover 50 to 60%, and 30 to 40% are from nuclear, CCUS, and carbon recycling, and 10% from hydrogen and ammonia. So the Japanese power companies and the government are trying to use coal power plants, but instead of using coal, they're trying to use ammonia and hydrogen, and they are doing a demonstration right now. And we need innovation. That's why I think the government is supporting these innovative activities using GX bond. And the Japanese government actually likes to create a roadmap for different industry. And here I am showing a technology roadmap for iron and steel. This is being crafted by the government and steel sector. And for blast furnace or strand casting rolling or electric arc furnace, and they have different technologies to be implemented up until 2050. For the blast furnace, they are trying to using on-site hydrogen after the 2030 and off-site hydrogen in 2050. And at the same time, CO2 capture and separation, CCS, being planned. So for this, and I can clearly say that hydrogen is a very important element for the Japanese carbon neutral strategies. For the power generation and for the steel sectors, we really need hydrogen. And if we claim for the carbon neutrality, this must be green in the end. And I personally think that maybe we can start from blue or gray hydrogen at the beginning, but I think for achieve carbon neutrality, we need a green one in the end. And also, we probably have to use some CCS technologies too. So hydrogen and CCS, I think, are very important key elements for the Japanese carbon neutral strategies. And chemical industries also have their own strategies for the carbon neutrality. But here I am sharing with you the CCUS concept. And I know the Australian industries and governments are working on CCS, carbon capture and storage. But the Japanese government is also promoting CCUS. So once they capture the carbon, they want to promote to the utilize CO2. And you can use it for EOR for sure. That I think have been established technologies. And some of the direct utilization is also possible. But the industry is now working on carbon recycling. So once they capture the carbon, they want to create chemicals using captured carbon. And they also want to create lots of fuels, micro-age biofuels, or methanol, ethanol, diesel, CO2-driven fuels or biofuels or gas fuels and methane. But for them to create, produce these fuels, they always need hydrogen. So hydrogen, and it must be comes with a reasonable cost. So that's a big challenge. But once again, I think hydrogen is a very important part or element of the Japanese carbon neutral policy, carbon neutral target. And CCS is another key technology. So this map is I took from the JOGMEC, Japan Organization Metals and Energy Securities. I believe they have a branch in Sydney. And JOGMEC now is kind of organizing all these CCS activities. And the government picked up 9 spots. Sorry, this is in Japanese. And this is a project by Tomakomai. I think the Peter helped them implement this CCS. So this is, I think, first CCS that has been really going well. And there is a CCS on this region in Tohoku area and CCS in this region and CCS in the Kyushu area. But some of the CCS, they are trying to store in Malaysia, like the one in this here. They capture the CO2 here and they will carry it to the Malaysia. And this CCS project also is considering to move transport it to Malaysia, Sarawak actually. This CCS projects in, I think, the Nagoya area with Nippon Steel and Mitsubishi. I think they are trying to transport in the Pacific. And this CCS project in the Tokyo Bay area, they are also moving to Malaysia. So yeah, I'm wondering it could happen that we may have to transport to Australia to have CCS if the cost is reasonable. And for the international schemes, Japanese government has been promoting joint crediting mechanism, JCM. And so the idea is that using Japanese technologies, they want to reduce carbon emission in their partner countries. But here they are restricting this to the developing economies. So this is a kind of alternative to the CDM, Green Development Mechanism, that Japanese government industry have invested a lot. And they've been promoting this and they are having, I think, like 30 countries. And lots of projects have been implemented in Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam. And I think there is a proposal of CCS under JCM in Malaysia too. Oh, and you can see, yeah. This map below is showing the number of the projects in the 2022. So we have now more projects. And as an academician, I am wondering maybe we can have some similar scheme between Japan and Australia to have some kind of carbon credit scheme that promotes the carbon emission reduction activities. Yes, so I think I will skip the slides. So the conclusion that the Japanese national level climate policy was characterized by a voluntary approach before the carbon neutral announcement. And the regional ETS has been implemented and successful. But after the carbon neutral announcement, now even at the national level, carbon pricing has become a major policy instrument under the GX Act, and GX ETS will become mandatory. And as I showed at the end, the hydrogen and CCS are important for the Japanese economy to achieve carbon neutrality. And for that, I think we probably need a lot of cooperation with Australia. Concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Toshi. Fantastic. If you can maybe stop sharing, because yeah, that's perfect. We can see you. It was actually some questions that I had. I think you answered them along the way. It's interesting to see how the GX League actually, companies were really keen to participate, obviously, so they could access those funds. Was that anticipated in a way, the way that obviously that's the way the government set it up, or probably your smart idea, was it, with the GX League to get companies to, embrace the idea of transitioning and decarbonisation?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was reading the question on the Q&A. So can you
Don't look at the
repeat question
questions
again?
I'll ask you. Don't worry. We'll look at those later, Toshi. Don't you worry. So, and anyone can put a question in the chat and we'll try to get to them. But yeah, I guess, the surprising thing was how many companies did sign up to the GX League. And I assume that was because of the carrot that they could access those additional funds. Was that right? Or
Yes. Okay. So I think there are two aspects why the companies were joining the GX League. First one is that actually by being a part of the GX League, they can actually get involved in the design of the policy. So
Okay.
how to design an ETS, they have an opportunity to say or claim what they think is right. So I think that's one big reason for the company started join, even though it was voluntary. And second, maybe most of all, it was required to be a GX ETS to have financial support from the government. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great carrot. So you've touched a little bit on collaboration between Australia and Japan. Do you see the JCM as as possibly the way to enable that? Because you talked about CCUS and other things. Where do you think, knowing you're here, you've been looking at Australia, how do you think we can move that along in the absence of sort of huge incentives at the moment here?
So GCM is a kind of substitute for clean development mechanism. So this has been targeted for developing countries only. And so I think the major partners are ASEAN countries.
Yeah.
But this is approved as a voluntary contribution under Paris Agreement. So it's an internationally acknowledged system. And I personally think that maybe we can extend this to Australia, but I'm not the expert of the international treaty, so I don't know how it caused some conflicts. But now after the last COP, we have I think people were saying that we can have now international credit schemes under the Paris Agreement. So we maybe, I don't know, propose some kind of new scheme that we can transfer the carbon credits between Australia and Japan, and that gives some incentives for private sectors to do the CCS. And yeah, that's something that I would like to, propose or consider.
I think it's a really interesting point, because there is that big hump to get over with CCS from the cost point of view, and there are many companies keen to decarbonize, but obviously within their profit and so forth. But actually trying to create that action, I think, is really challenging. So yeah, something to explore, absolutely. I'll go to a couple of the questions. Now, often there's this discussion about hydrogen, it's very expensive, you lose the energy in transportation and those sorts of things. So Ruben's put a lot of detail in there, which I won't go through. But his question really is, would Japan be better off importing cheap embedded energy in the form of energy intensive goods? What are your thoughts on that, based on the cost of hydrogen production and your aim potentially to import hydrogen?
Yeah, so I think the initial idea of carbon neutrality that announced by the Japanese government, people were excited to produce hydrogen in Japan. But I think to produce green hydrogen, we need a lot of renewable energies. And I think Australia is a more appropriate place to generate green hydrogen. And some companies are trying to come up with way to transport green hydrogen generated produced in Australia in the format of ammonia or other form of chemicals. So if there is a technological, we need innovation still to make the transportation cost reasonable. But some people some scholars are arguing that, if it's cheaper to introduce and produce green hydrogen in Australia for steel sector, why don't we produce steel in Australia? You have a steel, you have mines and also the green hydrogens, but I'm not sure how realistic it is. But as you point out, that there is always a risk that if we have too much regulation at the fast pace, the industry may end up just importing energy-intensive goods from outside instead of producing steels or chemical products in Japan. But I think that's why the Japanese government is trying to be very careful, and they call it a transition. So they call it the GX transition bond, climate transition bond, instead of a green bond.
And I think that's exactly what Ruben's saying. In some ways, why would you not import it? But it's interesting because also you talked about the aspirations of using ammonia for generation and those sorts of things, which creates a different sort of value proposition, I guess, as well. And I know there's people like here at Curtin, Craig Buckley's doing a whole lot of stuff on hydrogen storage and sodium borohydride as a potential. Kotai Energy is one of the supporters in there. So I think we can see that Japan is very interested in collaborating on these. Leo Herbert's been very active. He's wrote lots of comments. So I'm just going to ask one of his questions. And I guess it was around, you talked about the transportation of CO2 to Malaysia, potentially Australia. What happens? Is it that is the plan when it goes to those countries that it's for storage, for sequestration, or is it for utilization? What's the plan in those at this stage, do you think?
I think for the project I have shown in the map from JOGMEC, I think that's mainly for the storage. Malaysia, I think, have many places that are suitable for storage of CCC carbon, because they had some of the fields. So I think if they were going to the CCUS, they want to do it inside Japan. Because we have many chemical companies interested in doing usage or captured carbon, and there are several projects going on.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to skip to another one here. The efficacy of a planned ETS will depend, as a driver for CCS and so forth, will depend on the resulting price of emissions. My understanding is the current shadow price on carbon is low in Japan. What are the price forecasts for the new system? And what is the expected price required to achieve Japan's net zero goals by 2050?
That is a very good question. Actually, the government has never shown some kind of the price that Japan needs for carbon neutrality. And they haven't shown the price range that the government is aiming for the 2030 target or 2040 target. So even our discussion for the design of GXETS, we haven't seen any numbers, even though government wants to have a lower limit and upper limit, but we haven't seen the number. The only number that I think we have seen is the price in the Tokyo Stock Exchange, the price from the J credits, domestic credits. So the lower price, forestry credits are about $80. But the energy efficiency credits like $70 or $18. So I think the price will be at least more than $18. But I don't know if it's gonna be as high as Australian carbon credits.
Okay. There's a few comments which I'll try and summarize, and I guess it gets back to the point that was talking before about, the cost and loss of emissions with hydrogen production, or efficiency, I should say. So there's several people here suggesting that the most efficient thing for Japan to do is to import our Australia's do the refining in Australia and then send it across. But as opposed to sort of continuing the way for Japan to be producing that, do you think the government is considering those sorts of ideas between the countries like Australia, or do you think there's still the push to try and keep, because I know Australia is trying to build up their industry to do those sorts of things. What's the thinking around policy of that?
I think this is my total conjecture.
Yes.
Total conjecture, but in Japan, the steel sector has been a very important part of the industry and the industrial policy.
Yes.
So, especially they are proud of producing high quality steel products for automobiles. So I believe that they want to keep it inside Japan. But some economists or some stakeholders are proposing those ideas that it may be more wiser for Japan to invest in Australia and produce steels using a green hydrogen. Yeah.
And I guess that becomes those sort of trade-offs, doesn't it, around maintaining industry? And I know Australia is pushing really hard to do more and more onshoring here for all of the reasons that Japan's trying to keep theirs there as well. It's, I guess, in this changing sort of geopolitical that's coming through with Trump and different tariffs and so forth. How do you see global alliances changing through the economics of things? Are you seeing, I mean, it's early days, but I'm sure you've thought about this at different times, Toshi.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an economist, so I'm not a political scientist, but I can tell that Australia and Japan have been a very stable, good relations for many decades. So from that point, I think it's great for Japan to promote more collaboration in the context of energy and climate policies. But in general, Japanese government heavily have a strong emphasis on the cooperation with the US in many aspects, many policies. But as you know that they change policies every 4 years.
Or every couple of days at the moment.
Every couple of days, okay. So it's kind of difficult to have a long-term commitment with them. So we have to be very careful. So I think the importance of Australia has become even more, bigger in the last few years. I mean, in this decade, yeah.
It is interesting. I mean, just the recent, this 25% tariff on our industry steel, and it's even listening as you're driving to work, the conjecture, let's really uplift our friendship with the US. Others are saying, no, let's take a hard line, which I'm sure is exactly what you're saying, or can you actually find the middle ground with someone like Trump, I think is very interesting. There's a couple of questions here from Wahasu. I may not pronounce correctly, but they're obviously thanking you for your presentation. But can you share the experiences? What experiences have the Kyoto and Saitama ETS gained over the past 10 years? Actually, I think it was Tokyo, wasn't it? The GX ETS can learn from. So how did that help?
Okay, so Tokyo, Saitama have been successfully reducing emissions. However, they don't have a marketplace. When Japanese business opposed ETS in around 2008 to 2010, they criticized ETS as a money game. So speculation and all those things, financial sectors makes money, but the manufacturing sector just suffers. In response to this, Tokyo, Saitama did not create the marketplace for the carbon credits. And in addition, they have introduced emission reduction credit scheme, in which they can trade only after they reduce the emissions. So liquidity is very limited. And in addition, companies cannot tell the appropriate price, the price that they are exchanging. Only bilateral trading was permitted. And so this was not helpful for the companies to acquire the carbon credits. So the learning from this experience, the current government is trying to have more liquidity of permits and also the market price signaling systems. So that lesson from Tokyo Saitama is helping the current Japanese government to help Tokyo Stock Exchange to have a price signaling in a clear way. So that's, I think, one big lesson we learned from Tokyo Saitama ETS. Yeah.
So building on that, are there other features or components that you think are needed for a mature ETS? And they say, does the GX have a plan to establish these features? In your thoughts, what are they?
I think the appropriate, so we will start from the allowance, free allowances, but we haven't set the level of free allowances. So we have to have an appropriate level of, if it's too tight, I think it's going to be too much burden for the industry. But if it's too loose, nobody works on the emission reductions, right? The government has to choose the very appropriate level to make the emission reduction and to have a market reduction. And in addition, I think credibility of the policy is very important. Long-term credibility. If the private sectors cannot trust the commitment from the government, I think they may not can do a serious investment or participation in the carbon market.
Yeah. Let me just have a look at it's really interesting, I think, when we think of it also on the global level as well. How do we start to see this leveling out? Because of, and I think that's where you're saying how can we align different countries moving forward to think about this, or, does that actually help to uplift if we can get these different things happening, say Japan and Australia together? Does that actually start to influence the global market in a way, I guess, as well? Because we've suddenly got carbon border adjustment measures and other things moving into, right?
Yeah. So in Australia, do you have a discussion of carbon border adjustment?
There is some. It's with the EU imposition on that, but it's looking at which industries are going to be impacted and which aren't, and I think you can sort of handpick the ones where it will be most. But this is where they're responding to think about what we can do onshore in different ways. If we can, as you talked about, produce renewable energy, at scale, does that make it actually cheaper to produce some of these things, do the direct reduction of iron and so forth, to then move it as a way that it helps the sort of carbon, overall the carbon budget. So there's a lot of discussion going on. I think right now, my observation would be, and it's a little bit, was impressed by the GX League and how that's working from the point of view of how do you create the incentives for many of these industry that are sort of, what's their bottom line, and they're really important to the economies or the local communities, the regional communities that they operate in. So what's the role of how do we support that while also making sure that we're fast tracking the transition and not, not taking the foot off the pedal. And I think this is where there's a lot of discussion going on around what does that look like and what's going to move it forward. It would be mine. So, yeah. What has it got here? I'm just looking, one last question. There we go. Here's one from Riccio, who works in hydrogen. And he says, hydrogen derivatives will play a role in decarbonising Japan's economy. What will be the proportion of this that is imported from overseas? And any ideas on the price level of imported hydrogen? We've got a crystal ball.
That's a very good question. I haven't looked at the detailed roadmap for hydrogen, but I'm not sure. We know that the current price of hydrogen is too high, too expensive for industry to use for their carbon neutrality perspective. But a lot of people are saying that we will end up importing lots of hydrogen because producing hydrogen in Japan seems to be costly than initially I think they thought. So yeah, I think we probably have to import a lot from Australia.
Yeah, it's interesting to also, I'm just very aware of time. I know when I look at, the hydrogen strategy, that was sort of a really big focus. Perhaps we haven't been able to deploy the renewable energy at the scale that was anticipated. So Australia's probably lost a bit of its potential in the hydrogen production. It's still there in some ways, but I know countries like Germany are still very interested in green hydrogen. And of course, other countries are stepping up to sort of look at that production. So I think it's really interesting when we look at the global trade, the global partners, and how that's going to move forward, especially in the uncertainty of what's happening, say, in the US and all of these geopolitical uncertainties that are arising. So I think, Toshi, it's been fantastic to have you here. And I think, opening up the conversations about where there is opportunities for collaboration, opportunities for innovation and shared R&D on a lot of these things. And I know there's many economists that have been looking at that sort of question about, do we send it to Japan in this way, or does Japan, and obviously each country has their own sort of ambitions, but I guess when we look at it on the global stage of actually reducing the CO2 for the world is going to hopefully be the #1 driver, and we can find ways to move that. And I think, having good government to government relationships is a really critical part. So it's fantastic that you've had the support to come here, and I think there's going to be lots of great conversations continuing. So thank you for your time, and thank you everyone for logging on and being a part of this, and we'll keep in touch. Absolutely. Thanks, Toshi.
Thank you, Vera, and thank you for all the attendance. Thank you very much.
Thank you.